Evolution in Divine Love is an invitation to reimagine everything from the place where it all begins and where it all returns. Love.
Welcome to another episode of Evolution in Divine Love podcast. We're continuing with Chapter 3, which is Mapping the Soul's Unbroken Potential. Today we'll be talking about, but the soul is changeless. And we'll be speaking with Swami Padmanabha first, and then continuing with Venkata Bhatta in the second section. So welcome, everyone. In the preceding chapters, Maharaj, you have discussed the changeless and ever-evolvingness of love and God. So in this section, you discuss the changelessness and boundless expansion of the soul. During this, you use the term tatastha, or liminal, to describe the soul's position. So can you explain what this term means and why it's so central to understanding the soul's potential, and also what role does the environment play in such liminality?
Well, before describing the soul as tatastha, which is of course a term from the scriptures, I mentioned that the soul is a unit of potential, and we cannot define who we are separate from that. So it's difficult. Sometimes language is not very useful because we may say the soul and its potential, like if they are two different things, but actually we cannot define ourselves separate from our potential. And actually that's what the term tatastha attempts to convey. Tatastha actually it can be sometimes translated as marginal, though sometimes that doesn't sit well with some, because marginal can be rendered as marginalized and somehow outcast or who knows what. So liminal is another word, which means nor here nor there, in the sense that, again, we have free will and we can choose to situate ourselves under the influence of one particular environment or the other. So in one sense, the term tatastha indicates that our agency as souls, we are units of agency, and in that context of agency, we are units of potential, or as I mentioned in the book, we are units of unactualized potential. In other words, I mean, we may have actualized some of our potential, but again, there's no limit to our potential, especially when we express with the environment called love. The soul has endless potential. So speaking about the influence of the environment, I remember how Srila Bhakti Goswami Maharaj will say that we are a byproduct of the environment. In his own words, in this language he used to invoke, like, depending the environment we are in, we can restrict our potential, we can suffocate our potential, we can express it in very partial or distorted ways, or we can really see our potential bloom in unimaginable ways. And that's how I like to think when Krishna uses the word in the Bhagavad Gita, the word Mahatma, to refer to the soul, or to refer to his lovers, his bhaktas, actually, to someone who is actualizing their potential in the best possible way, and he will call them Mahatma, or big soul, or great soul. And it's not that the soul is augmenting its physical size, because the soul does not have a physical size, but generally we hear Atma, and then we have Mahatma, soul and great soul. So basically the idea is a great soul is someone who is exploring and actualizing their potential under the energetic department that has the purpose of actualize our potential the most, which is love. So it's very crucial which is the particular environment we choose ourselves to relate with, especially in the beginning, of course, when we are in the most enlightened stage. Externally, even, it doesn't matter where we are. we will perceive the divine presence everywhere. But in the very beginnings, most of us are recommended to connect with overtly clear spiritual connection. So gradually we can realize that, of course, ultimately spiritual environment is everywhere, but you have to begin somewhere.
Yeah, thanks for that. That reminds me also of what you quote later in this section. It's a beautiful quote by Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and an eloquent passage where he talks about the changelessness and the eternal evolution in Braj, and mentions that, if you don't mind, I'll just read a little bit of this because it's just so beautiful. In Braj, we can find that our thirst for any higher change of environment, any change of association, need no longer be quenched. Yet there remains an eternal thirst for a closer relationship with that sweet absolute. While there's no possibility of any higher change of the environment, the only remaining question is how to come into closer connection with that environment. And that becomes the initiative of our movement there, more and more intimate connection with that environment. So that the two things really struck me from that passage. And one of them is the thirst for any higher change of environment no longer needs quenching, no longer needs to be quenched, and how the only desire is greater intimacy. And that reminds me of, it brings to mind Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, where he expresses his willingness to take birth again and again, because the drives home the reality that Vraj is at hand, and our journey into a deeper and deeper intimacy with the divine can be right here and right now.
Home.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking of when you say Mahaprabhu, when you went to Sikshastakam, him saying, the matter returning over and over again to planet Earth. I actually went to his last 12 years in Gambira, in this small room. And Srila Siddha Maharaj was saying, yeah, well, you don't need a change of environment. And he was just living in a 2-meter per 2-meter square rock room, which will be like a torture chamber for most of us to spend 12 years almost without living there. But he didn't feel the need of changing any environment because he was, again, as you say, Braja was at hand. So as Srila Siddha Maharaj says in the beautiful quote you shared, there is no need to change the environment. That will be the changeless part, because again, there is an ever-evolving development of intimacy with that environment. So I really like that word intimacy, and I don't want to go astray from the conversation, but I think it's a very important term to explore. Recently, yesterday we were sharing with Spanish-speaking devotees about that, like how we can talk about love, divine love, connection with the divine in terms of intimacy, and how we are to prepare ourselves for deeper degrees of intimacy. And again, go into something very basic as how is our emotional intimacy? How much intimacy do we have with our own emotional landscape, with ourselves, in relationship with others? How willing we are to cultivate intimacy and relationships. And of course, ultimately, we will be talking about divine intimacy, but that's even more intimate and more powerful. So how much we are already doing something about it. So yeah, I really appreciate the usage of intimacy as a thread here, so to say, a golden thread.
I'm thinking earlier when you were talking about the environment, so the environment also means sadhu sangha, right? Like the people who we associate with and the influence that we have on each other, intimacy included, like where we develop that. And I was thinking how previously, like knowing that jiva souls are like tatastha shaktis, and tatastha means either influenced by the material energy or the spiritual energy. So like now I feel like I'm kind of seeing another dimension to it. Like it's not either or of like, material or spiritual energy, but also how the relationship has an important role here. Because I think you quote Srila Sridhar Maharaj too, that how our potential is actualized in relationship. So yeah, I'm seeing that how that's also then becomes a mindful, intentional thing that we do to choose environment, to choose the people we want to be with. And in one sense, it's somewhat a conflicting situation for me sometimes, thinking that, oh, we should love everybody and we should extend ourselves to everybody and be the same. But at the same time, like, I want to be careful with like who I want to surround myself with. So how do we kind of balance that, in terms of like sharing equal, like, affection and our time with everyone around, like not even like, differentiating between devotee, non-devotee and things like that, just generally everyone, and at the same time the small set of like people who we can grow in intimacy and help actualize our potential.
Yeah, two things that come to my mind. Thank you for that, those reflections. First, I would think it's sometimes when we speak about the influence of material energy and spiritual energy. I appreciate that you brought also the point that we have our will in the midst of that. Now there is something called agency, again, free will. We can choose, and that creates our choices somehow create an influence. And it's not because if not many times we just speak about being influenced without us having chosen that being influenced. So unconsciously we may not take responsibility for our choices that create a particular influence, right? So it's always goes back on some level at least to our choice. Because if no we say, oh no, I'm under the influence of this, and unconsciously I can play the victim. Like, but in one sense, the particular department I'm under the influence of, it has been also a result of a previous choice, so to say, that creates that. And even if I'm in a particular department, and again, this is not black and white, as you said, and I'm being influenced by whatever, still I can exercise my free will in that department. It's not like I have no hope if I'm under the influence, quote unquote, of material nature. There's no escape from that, and it's just like predetermined. I have no play, no part in the play. So I think that's an important point when we talk about being influenced. I wanted just to clarify that, but go into your main question in terms of sadhu sangas and environment and how. Yeah, well, I mean, we read, right, Rupa Goswami describing sadhu sanga, Swajatya, Snigdasya, Swatavara. He's putting some conditions, at least to begin with, in terms of whom to associate with. It has to be like-minded, affectionate. Another word for that will be intimate, as we were mentioning before. Swatavara, some higher current of revelation has to manifest in that circle due to that intimacy and openness and vulnerability and safety. So he's qualifying sadhusanga in a way that clearly makes the point that not probably everyone will be up to that particular standard. So not everyone will belong to that definition. So how we can start for wherever we are. I mean, of course, the ideal is, okay, relate to everyone, be open to everyone, loving to everyone. The environment is always friendly. So Sridhar Maharaj ultimately will say that. But of course, in principle, we know that the environment is friendly. Krishna's presence is everywhere. But as long as we don't have that vision, and we may misread reality, we may need to be selective in our environment, in our circle, in our tribe, and get nourished from that circle so we can gradually expand our vision and appreciation to encompass more and more and more till encompassing everything. But again, this idea of relating to everyone unconditionally, lovingly, and so on, actually is the ultimate goal to attain. So we have to be very careful not to, push ourselves to be there while there is the ultimate goal to attain, and we may be still far from there, and we may feel that may be a recipe for frustration and another form of dysfunctionality, because we want to be universally unconditionally loving to every creature in creation, and it's a very nice and very healing narrative, but we can turn it into something very dysfunctional if we start to press and force that upon us or others as a standard. Well, that's actually the natural outcome of being basically having attained the ultimate goal of life, so to say, no? Which is ongoing, of course. So I will say, yeah, there is a point for most of us for a long time probably to be a little selective in who we choose to be surrounded by, and gradually trust, build safe space, open ourselves, gain this intimacy, gain this strength, this foundation, this trust, this lovingness, and gradually expand it to bigger and bigger circles, like a ripple effect, but very gradually, right? Like if you throw this stone on the lake and it will make a small circle, then immediately a bigger circle, immediately a bigger circle. At one point, the whole lake will be a rippling of that original circle, but it's not happening in one shot. So we have to be very honest about where we are, and choose our environment accordingly, I will say.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Like, so we can remain honest to where we are and not feel the rush to think like we have to be at the ideal. Same as saying, like, when we are practicing, already thinking like we are, super advanced, or like trying to practice that way. And I also appreciate you saying that there is a free will, like, it's not that we're just coming under the influence of material energy or spiritual energy. Somehow I just had this idea that it was automatic. So yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that.
Yeah, those two departments are always there, no? Maya Shakti, Swarup Shakti, Bhakti Shakti, but also we have a choice in the matter, right? So yeah, I think it's important to empower ourselves in a humble way to take responsibility in that direction. Yeah.
In this section, also, you mention about the how the soul is described as amazing, which has many, many different descriptions in itself, the word amazing. But hearing the two of you speak, I'm wondering also, like, if that amazingness is in part not just the specific agency that we have to choose between the two realms. Do you think that that's part of our amazingness? And if not, what do you see as being what it is that's amazing about the soul?
Mhm. Well, I don't want to speak for Krishna, who is the one who is saying this here, right? So we have to ask him. He uses the word Acharya 3 times, as we know, verse 29 of 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, to describe the soul as amazing or wonderful or astonishingly miraculous, shockingly incredible, and so on. So what is that about the soul that is amazing? And I will say the whole thing about the soul is amazing, right? When Krishna says the soul is amazing, he's not like cherry picking like one particular section of the soul that is amazing and this other section is unamazing, but he's speaking to who we are as a whole, because we are a whole within a whole. Let's not forget that. And though we may use the word sometimes brokenness, messiness, that's not part of the intrinsic constitution of the soul, right? The soul is not broken, right? The soul is whole. Om Purnamada Purnamidam. From complete whole, other complete wholes emerge. The soul, the material world, everything is in itself complete. It's a holon. We have a holarchy, as we also refer in the book, which is holes within holes, holes with double U, double B, right? Not holes with H. Sometimes we feel ourselves as a whole, starting with H, filled with holes, but actually we forgot to add the first letter before that. So I would say, yeah, when Krishna says the soul is amazing, he's not discriminating there between parts, because we are not parts. We are not a combination of parts. The soul is a whole. So that whole that we are is amazing. And of course, again, that whole is whole plus potential. Remember, when we say whole, complete, let's be careful not to think about fixed maximum, no dead end. You are complete. There's no potential. There's no further amazingness. So I will say that, and as I try to make the point in the book, Krishna says the soul is amazing for what the soul is and what we are. We are a unit of potential, and that's amazing. But every quality of the soul, everything about the soul, in regards to what the soul actually is amazing. And one of those things you mentioned in the question or in your sharing, free will. That's one of the 21 qualities of the Atman that Jiva Goswami mentions in Paramatma Sandarbha. Kartritva, we have agency, free will. So that quality is amazing. And every other quality that is mentioned there, eternity, full with potentiality, changeless in its own way, all of that is amazing. Whatever we want to say about the soul is actually amazing. So that's why Krishna does not specify. No, a part of you is amazing. This particular thing is amazing, but not this one. But again, what is the soul? That's the whole spiritual journey, right? Deconstructing the false self sense of identity, and contacting the true self, the Atman, the soul with its potential, that we are not different from. So I will say that, right? We have a unique, incredible potential in love. And when Krishna glimpses that, again, he sees us for all that we can be. He says, amazing. But also he says, yeah, what the soul is in each one of their qualities, in the wholeness of the soul. Acharya. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So, and I know, again, it may sound too good to be true. And for us, it's a hard pill to swallow, to actually believe that we are so, and believe it in a humble way again. So I will say a big part of our sadhana effort is to enter into that sacred space of contacting and experiencing, not only believing, but contacting and experiencing the amazingness of the soul as a whole, with double U, double B, and at the same time in a humble way, because realizing I'm not my own creation, right? So, but it's there, and that's not separate from the potential. So what's the potential of the Atma? And then dedicating the rest of our eternal existence to exploring that amazing potential, basically, that we are.
That's so beautiful. And when you were speaking, and you were talking about the whole with the H and the whole with the W, I thought, the W, there's two U's. It's about relationality. So how we turn a whole into a whole is through relationality.
We can make that play of words because we are speaking in English here. If I will be in a Spanish podcast and my Spanish version of this book, I won't be able to do that. So I'm glad that you're taking proper advantage of the English language here. Thank you.
So welcome to the second part of Evolution and Divine Love podcast, where we are discussing the soul is changeless with Venkata Bhatta, who is a chaplain and a co-host of a famous podcast. Thank you for joining us here today, Venkata Bhatta.
Thank you for having me and for sparking a lot of thought, a lot of reflection, and a lot of thought. Sometimes it's a very different experience, I would say, when you read something, and then when you read something knowing you're going to be put on a hot seat and you don't have to talk about it. I don't know how hot the seat is going to be today, but just knowing that we're going to talk about it, I feel like, it invited me into a deeper reading of this section and of the book as a whole. I have to confess that at this point, I'm not done with the book as a whole, but I've been enjoying it so far, and trying to sneak in as much reading of it as I can, while also trying to be deep and present.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing your homework, and you're taking it seriously. So in this section, it's discussed the paradox of how the soul is both changeless and ever evolving. So I'm wondering how what comes up for you actually when you when you even approach this paradox, like that the soul, the self is changeless and ever evolving. Perhaps even we were discussing before we started airing that you as a chaplain see so much evolving in the culture, and I wonder if that also affects your view and your perspective of the soul and the bhakti tradition itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope as our conversation unfolds a little bit, I might, draw from some of those experiences. I would say, and maybe I'll start there and then double back. I would say definitely being in a role that is that calls me into relationship with people, some of whom identify with a particular religious or spiritual tradition, whether that identity is kind of broadly speaking Hindu, whether it's particularly Vaishnav or Advaitin or Shakta, because I do serve mainly the Hindu community across different sampradayas. But whatever the identity or lack thereof, right? Sometimes it's relationship with folks who don't identify with a particular faith tradition, who may not even identify with theology or spirituality generally, but who still are open to entering into some kind of relationship, uh, seeking meaning or purpose at its root. Um, I feel like that call to be in relationship with people has necessarily um, helped me to appreciate just dynamism. And so the word that keeps coming to my mind when I'm reading the book as a whole, but particularly the section that I think we're zeroing in on, this idea of kind of responding to the apparent objection to the idea of the soul as a kind of ever evolving entity, but the soul is changeless, right? Particularly here, the word that keeps coming up for me, although interestingly, I don't see it necessarily, explicitly used so much, but I do feel very much that this is aligned with this idea of evolution is dynamic or dynamism. And I feel like my experiences have definitely helped me to appreciate, um, and sometimes even to be humbled by this kind of dynamism that, in some ways, really challenges what I might assume to be a kind of a static, fixed reality. When I approach situations, but particularly people, in a mood or a mindset of something static, even something changeless, and we can get into what do we mean by changeless, but static, changeless in that sense. I feel like I'm closing myself and closing that person off from possibility. Um, and there's a certain arrogance, I think, that, at least for me, I don't want to, point fingers at others, but for me, I feel like when I'm in more of that space of, I've got this figured out, that static space, there is a tendency towards arrogance, right? Even the language of, oh, I've got this figured out, like I've got it, right? Um, versus this sort of dynamic, like I am, wow, like I'm present to something going on here. I'm a part of it, but I'm not all of it, right? Um, that's sort of, I think, where maybe I've felt it most in terms of my chaplaincy work. But I would like to also kind of double back, because one of the first things I'm struck by in this section is even the way that this sort of subsection of the chapter is is titled, right? The kind of hypothetical Vaishnava objector to Swami's thesis, right? But the soul is changeless, and I just thought there's a really interesting kind of way of framing it, right? Sort of Purva Paksha, um, but also kind of maybe that, yeah, that like that inner wait. But I thought our philosophy said this, and yeah. And so I just appreciate that framing, and I think it also points to, um, for me, it brings up some other, shall we say, less healthy traits I've observed and experienced in devotional communities. So if you'd like, we can kind of maybe go into that a little bit. But I'm happy to take the conversation anywhere we want to.
No, yeah, that sounds great. You did touch upon some of them already, like the stagnant kind of approach, and thinking that there's a fixed maximum that really stifles potential. And before we go into the direction of how things are limited, I really appreciate the word dynamic and dynamism. To me, it brought like an idea of multi-dimension, where
Yes.
it's not even just progressing, just continually progressing in one direction, but it's multi faceted and multi-dimensional. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that, again, I really appreciate about this approach, and I think it's very much Padmanabha Maharaj's sort of mood as well, as I understand it, is this idea of the multiplicity, the multi-dimension. One of my dear friends and someone I very much look up to as one of my academic heroes, Jeff Long, who wrote the forward or the forward, and the preface is written by Steve Rosen, so another academic hero. Um, Both of them are I think, fittingly what sometimes is called pracademics. So I think they're both sort of in the academic sphere. Steve Rosen, Satyaraj is more of an independent scholar. Jeff Long is someone who's quite accomplished within sort of the bounds of academia, more formally. And yet both of them, I think, have been quite public about their own practices, and their different practices. Satyaraj being a practicing Gaudiya, and Jeff being an Advaitin by way of the Vedanta Society and the Ramakrishna Mission. But I also appreciated, while there's much, agree to disagree, particularly with our Advaitin siblings, I think this multidimensional, this appreciation of multiplicity, and you use the word paradox, and Swami uses the word paradox also, and so the apparent paradox maybe of that sort of unity and multiplicity. I think that is something that is very much a part of our tradition as Gaudiyas. And I think it also, in its own way, shows up in every Vedantic tradition. Every Vedantic tradition has to sort of, I was going to say wrestle with it, but that almost makes it sound negative. So let me put it in a more positive way. I think every Vedantic tradition has to play with, or gets to play with, this, dynamic tension and of the sort of simultaneous multiplicity and unity. And I think I'm not an expert on the Vedanta of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda, tradition. Broadly speaking, it's an Advaitin tradition. But I think there is this inherent appreciation for that sort of, the multiplicity and multi-dimension is always in the mix. And maybe this takes us to the sort of apparent critique or the apparent objection, that I think that idea of multiplicity, while our tradition on the whole has an appreciation for multiplicity and talks a lot about multiplicity, I think maybe there's also an inherent discomfort with it, because multiplicity implies messiness.
It's
And it's scary. It's scary. There's something frightening about that, right? I can't quite contain it. I can't quite explain it. I can't quite.
control
I'm
it.
thinking of another rhyming word, but it's not coming to me. So I'll leave it at contain and explain for now, right? But like there's that messiness that it's very tempting to then take shelter of an overemphasis maybe on the sort of unity or unifying side. That, okay, yeah, there's this multiplicity and there's this messiness, but ultimately, yeah, and I see a parallel. I know we're maybe talking about something a little bit different than the subject of the soul's potentiality and inclination towards evolution. But I think there's something analogous or parallel here, where I think that's in its wildness, in its seemingly, unquantifiable messiness. There's something that's a little scary about that, and so it's easier to just go, okay, let me lean into this side that our tradition also has, and that our sacred texts do have the emphasis. that Padmanabha Maharaj cites from several references in the Gita, particularly, that really ground us in the emphasis on the unity, the changelessness, the stability, the fixedness, right? Things that feel a lot safer to us as embodied beings who can sometimes struggle with that messiness and the uncertainty. So I think that's part of what might be going on with that objection, right? Like I as a chaplain, I like to think about what is the question behind the question, what is the sort of emotion underlying even an apparently philosophical argument that's being made. Not to take away from the philosophical argument, but I'm not so much a philosopher, but I try to be a chaplain, and I try to sort of go, okay, well, what's the sort of emotion underlying it? And I think there's different things going on, but I think one is this sort of the fear of the messiness of multiplicity, and of something that feels harder to quantify and to contain. Um, Along with that, and perhaps it's a sort of a related, but I also see it as a little distinct, is a tendency. And it's funny because I think the last time that Padmanabha Maharaj and I had the occasion to chat, actually in the medium of a podcast episode, I think this came up quite a bit. The tendency towards literalism, and I think that is something that all religious traditions, have their own struggles with. I think ours in particular, for a lot of reasons that perhaps are beyond the scope of our conversation today. But I think our tradition in particular has inherited a kind of literalist approach, or maybe we can even say has developed. Sometimes I feel like we maybe pin too much of the blame on our teachers. So maybe even some of our acharyas didn't even um, intend, if I can dare to presume, I don't think they would even have intended as much literalism as we have developed in sometimes in the name of fidelity to our acharyas, fidelity to our tradition,
And
staunchness.
out of our own infancy, out of our own, lack of depth of understanding.
Yeah, yeah. Well, literalism is actually, and it's something I've come to really appreciate, right? Even though, as you could probably tell, I'm sort of, I'm using it slightly as a pejorative there when I say literalism, right? But actually no, like literalism um, has such an important role to play, particularly when one is young. And here I'm reminded of the different schemas that, teachers like acharyas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur present, and others, Rupa Goswami, present. Often like one of these tripartite, Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama type of frameworks, which, as a side note, one of the things that kind of frustrates me is sometimes we try to combine all those frameworks into one, and those are different frameworks existing, and they're used in different ways. Anyway, that's a side note. But one of the ways, not always, but one of the ways that this sort of Kanishta, um, more, if you want to say infancy, or sort of like this less mature stage of the spiritual journey, is talked about, is as a time of great tenderness, and a time where
Protection.
faith and realization needs to be protected. It needs to be nurtured, right? And how do you protect? I'm not a gardener, but all those beautiful gardening metaphors about how you protect that, little tiny seed or sapling. Sometimes you need to build a fence around it. You need to, right? Like you need to do certain things, not because the fence is what's required for all time, and the fence is itself, an essential component of gardening, but in service to protecting that tender fledgling, plant. That's as far as I'm going to get in a gardening metaphor before I make a fool of myself. But or maybe I already have. But at least my understanding is, right, that fencing, if we want to use that metaphor, plays an important role. And I think what can seem like, or maybe even what is in the moment, a sort of a literal faithfulness and adherence, full stop, and I'm not going to go deeper, and I'm not going to question it further, and this is not up for debate, whatever. Maybe that's something that helps us and keeps us protected and keeps us safe, so that we can develop. But with like with so many things, if we get stuck there, then that same thing that was designed to keep us healthy is now preventing growth, and is now causing harm. And so why do I bring this up? Well, I was reminded of this in reading, as Padmanabha Maharaj kind of catalogs in this really like beautiful and thorough way, the emphasis in even some of the earliest references that we find in the Bhagavad Gita, about the essential characteristics of the Atma. Why such an emphasis on the changelessness? And so what it immediately raised for me is, well, someone reading this through a very literalist lens is going to go, oh no, changeless, permanent, fixed, um, untransformable, um, and and then it's like anything outside of that parameter has got to be wrong. And then if it comes from a source that I don't quite trust, then I can just write that person off. So, okay, so this wacky renegade maverick Swami, like he's saying this stuff, but no. Bhagavad Gita tells me changeless, changeless, changeless. So I'm just gonna, write him off. Okay, but wait, what about when this other source and when Jiva Goswami seems to suggest this? Well, I can't maybe write him off so well. So instead I might, go into a place of panic, or I might suddenly start questioning everything and go, well, maybe this is a contradiction. Maybe I should just drop the whole pursuit. So that literalism, again, at the risk of sort of beating a dead horse, the literalism plays an important role. But if we become, I think, so beholden to it, it can actually become something that it like enslaves us and prevents us from growing. So that's something that definitely comes up for me, and it's a good example, although a very subtle example, I think, because a lot of times when this question of literalism comes up, it's more sort of hot button issues, right? Like people like to talk about, especially on podcasts and things like that. Well, you know, fill in the blank said this, right? Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada said this, Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Prabhupada said that, Narayan Maharaj said that. And, well, should we understand that literally, or right? So those are maybe more um, uh, clickbaity kind of examples of this struggle with literalism. Um, this is more subtle, I think, but it's just as much of I think a place to really examine ourselves and examine our communities. Um, so if okay, so I've kind of talked a lot about this literalism thing. So if the Gita is not to be taken, not that it's not to be taken but literally, but if there's something beyond a sort of ultra literalist view of the soul, the Atman, as Shashvata, as permanent, or as Avakarya, or as Tanu, these wonderful strong words. If there's another dimension to read them, so uh, I think Padmanabha Maharaj offers us. He opens a door for us to kind of explore that and play with, to use that term again, or some other ways of understanding this. I know for me, one way that I, maybe it's very simplistic read, but just because something's simplistic doesn't mean it's wrong. But for me, a very basic simplistic read is, hey, I can talk a big game, but at the end of the day, I identify really strongly with matter. I identify really strongly with Prakriti, in its gross elements and also in its more subtle elements. And so I need these strong reminders that, like, the real me, um, is something that is wholly distinct from Prakriti. And if Prakriti is known as, one of its, sort of eh, defining characteristics is its fluctuation and its impermanence, it would make sense to me that therefore, um, in the teachings that we know now as the Bhagavad Gita, that Sri Krishna Bhagavan would really lay a strong foundation of contrasting Purusha from Prakriti, of contrasting not just Purusha, but contrasting me and you and all of us as these wonderful adorable. I know it sounds funny to use the word adorable, but I mean that in the sense of, right, he actually adores us, and we are these precious beings, the Jivatma, as something that is not the fluctuating, prakriti that we so that we can so easily misidentify ourselves with. So it would make sense that he would lay a foundation and give this, right? So sometimes you use very strong language to emphasize a contrast. And so there's that. To me, that's one. I mean, there's other layers of understanding, but I think one very simple layer of understanding and reconciling the apparent paradox, to go back to your sort of original invitation, one very simple, very basic, but I think also very helpful way to me, that I use to reconcile, is to understand the context in which that contrast between fluctuating matter, subtle and gross, and the Atma. In that context, it makes sense to emphasize the Atma as changeless. And in that sense, 100% keep repeating it as a mantra: the soul is changeless, the soul is changeless, the soul is changeless. And ... right? Not the soul is changeless, therefore it's the end of the conversation. The soul is changeless. And when I'm, if not firmly convinced of that, at least when I'm sincerely, opening myself to that conviction, this whole other amazing world of possibility opens up. And that's where I feel like the second part of the apparent paradox comes in. That's where the evolution comes in. That's where the potentiality piece comes in. I'm going to stop there because I just feel like I'm talking a lot, but I really welcome your questions, your pushback, and yeah, I'm sorry for going off on a little bit of a rant here, but
Don't apologize. It was wonderful.
Wow. Yeah, you touched on so many different points. I was thinking, I want to actually, if I may, I want to go like few minutes back in our
sure,
conversation.
we can
And
go backwards, we can go forward. We're full of potentiality. Yeah,
yeah,
please.
yeah, what stood out to me was how you started this conversation by talking about relationship, and our
Yeah.
potential is unfolded in relationship. Like it all happens, in our relationship with others, with God, and like, in that dynamic. So I really appreciate how you brought that out, like as a very first thing.
Thank you.
And also, I wanted a bit more clarification on what you were saying about messiness in multiplicity. Did you mean that like in a relationship dynamic, that like how when you're dealing with different people, like many different people who are different from you, and like, all that, the messiness comes out? Then is that what you were talking about, or something else? Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely one application of it, of this sort of, yeah, I guess what I'm kind of relating multiplicity to messiness. I think one way that it comes out is in relationship, both within one particular relationship. There's, some aspects of multiplicity or multivalence, multidimension. When you have multiple relationships, that there's. But I was also thinking of it in maybe more of a basic sense, even where, going back to this notion of the Atma as having potentiality and the possibility for change, or to use the sort of operative word, to evolve, to unfold. Um, when I think of multiplicity there as in, like, if I'm fixed, that to me implies a sort of like a unity of one place, right? Where are you right now? I'm fixed. I'm in my office. My office is in Princeton, New Jersey. That's like a fixed location. Um, I'm thinking of like the imagery of, these days, a lot of times, rather than give someone directions, you just drop a pin, right? And people even say this. I know it's like just share your location. Like no one even has like the patience to like hear about like, right? It's just like, oh, just share your location, drop a pin, right? So to me, and again, maybe I'm going a little, I'm doing some funny things with this, so indulge me here. But when I think about the emphasis on the Atma as being fixed or changeless, it's like that dropping of a pin, right? It's like situating the Atma in this one really defining characteristic as being fixed and changeless, right? Um, so in this instance, when I talk about multiplicity, it's more the sense of, okay, if somehow inconceivably, paradoxically, maybe that we can say the Atma is in that fixed place, but it also has unlimited potentiality. Now there's messiness in the sense of, well, now there's like a seemingly infinite number of directions that I can go in. So I'm thinking of it more spatially, I think.
Where do you put
Multiplicity in the sense,
the pin? Where do you put the pin? If there's
yeah, you can't put the pin, right? Or it's like it moves. It's like a moving target or something. I don't know if we're mixing metaphors, right? But the idea, again, there's like an inherent, I think, messiness there.
Allowing
And
ourselves to be influenced by different people.
allowing ourselves to be influenced. I think, the unspoken thing, and I was thinking about this a lot when reading through the chapter, rereading the chapter in preparation for for this recording. I was thinking it's subtle. I think it's between the lines a little bit. But maybe one of the reasons the potentiality kind of space is so challenging and frightening for some is because if I've got like sort of infinite potential, then there's a lack of certainty. There's a lack of certainty, right? Um, but also there's a sense in which, right, like, so not only do I not know where I can go, what can become of me, or literally become of me in the sense of like, right, I just figured out this whole like who am I kind of thing, and now you're challenging me to like like suddenly lose that again because I don't know like what if the Atma turns into something else, right? And I think there's a subtle sort of fear of like, well, like what if it doesn't all work out in the end, right? um it feels much safer, I think, to just lean in on this, like, oh, like, yeah, no, I figured it out, right? Like the old school, again, kind of taking it maybe a little bit in-house, for those who identify with sort of, Gaudiya traditions or like Hare Krishna kind of communities, for lack of a better descriptor. If you think about sort of that kind of old school mentality of just almost like I'm not the body, I am the soul, I'm not the body, I'm spirit soul, I'm spirit soul, I'm spirit soul. It's true. I'm not, and again, it has a place to ground us, but it can almost become, and forgive me here, I don't mean to offend anyone, but it can almost become sort of a substitute for um, taking greater leaps of faith, or for for continuing on a spiritual journey and being open to right possibility, because it's like, nope, I figured it out. I was in ignorance before, thought I was the body, or the body and mind maybe, and now I got the answer. The answer is, you are not this body, you are Atma. Atma is changeless. We're done. It's like one and done. I'm done. So when I talk about multiplicity being messy, I think it's a little bit of that too. It's not just the multiplicity, but it's some sense of a lack of stability again, maybe. Is that help? I'm sort of thinking it through right now myself. But it's just something about what Bhakti Rasa Devi brought up, that it's like kind of get this contrast between sort of the safeness of unity or fixedness, and that sort of messiness and potential danger of multiplicity came up. But I had to think it through a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely much clearer now. And like, I thought it's funny when you were talking about us, coming to an understanding, oh, we're not this body, we are the soul. But as we read in this section, like we see that we're actually not even in touch with our soul. It's like the soul is so amazing. And once we come in touch with the soul's amazingness, our whole life changes. So Maharaj quotes Srila Sridhar Maharaj here in this section.
Yes. Yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, once we come in touch with the soul, our life goes through a diametrical change, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, then we question, like we are amazed, like, wow, such an amazing thing is within me, you know.
Yeah.
So like we actually
Yeah.
don't realize that. So to me, that says we actually haven't found that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like when we find the soul, we find God. I mean,
Yeah,
that's how
which by the way, the statement you just made, which I think is so beautiful, is itself, I think, for some in our communities, that can be a very like scary, right? Like there's maybe some people even listening to this, whenever they listen to this, but there may be folks listening now who suddenly an antenna went up for them and they said, "Oh, what did Shweta, Radhika just say? Like that sounds like Vag philosophy. That sound right." So again, it's a sort of like I think sometimes again I'm being a little facetious, but I think sometimes we're a little guarded, and so it's safer to just kind of take shelter of and maybe turn really deep, beautiful concepts into sort of protective cliches, right? And then we just can repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Since you mentioned the quote, it's one of my favorite parts of this chapter. Oh my gosh, I feel like Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Swami Maharaj had such a way with words, didn't he? And so may I just read the quote out? Would that
yes.
be okay? Because it is my favorite part of the chapter. When Swami Padmanabha quotes it, he says. B.R. Sridhar Swami affirms this truth, stating, and now here's the quote: "Once we encounter our soul," and I love that it's our soul, right? Because it's a very personal thing. Once we encounter our soul, right? Imagine we're encountering our own soul. A diametrical change takes place in our, again, life. At that moment, we are astonished to realize, and then he gives kind of a like he imagines what this person who's encountering their soul says, or what we would say. He says, "Oh, such a highly qualified thing exists within me. What a wondrous existence I possess. Truly, I am the soul, and the nature of the soul is so noble, so high, so good." This is radical, right? This is radical. It's not just I'm spirit soul. Sometimes we turn it into again almost like something kind of like, it's this is like talk about dynamic, talk about exciting, talk about right the cutting edge of spiritual adventure, right? If we're actually encountering that changeless soul, we're also encountering that dynamic living soul, and it's amazing, and it's wondrous, um and and I love that he takes us there, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit, but the implication is not just like I am this thing called Atman that is changeless. Okay, that's true compared to matter, um but that also, because I am qualitatively of the same divine substance at Satchitananda, um, Sridhar Swami Maharaj says, the nature. So truly, I am the soul, and the nature of the soul. In other words, the nature of me is noble, is high, is good. Right. I again maybe taking it back to sort of on the ground application, as someone who is part of a counseling profession, a caregiving profession. To me, this gives me such a um, powerful theological basis for self-acceptance, for self-care, for self-worth, right? Not in the sort of conventional, superficial way that's become a little trendy of like, oh, treat yourself. Okay, that has its place maybe, but this is like on the deepest level, right? If we actually even see a glimpse of what is being implied here, oh, it's like, wow, we're not fundamentally broken, flawed, you know, damned, right? And with due respect, I don't want to speak on behalf of any other tradition, but we, as far as my own study and understanding goes, we do not have this notion of, that we are sort of born with original sin or what have you, right? Like we are quite on the contrary. In some respects, we are pure, unlimited potentiality that opens the door to such a deep, deep experience and unfolding of all these things that these days more than ever, I think people are really looking for and hungering for.
It seems like you mentioned, well, I don't know if you said exactly original sin, but I was
I think
thinking,
I did, yeah.
yeah, so the many times it's taught, not only do we as Gaudiyas who embrace reincarnation, we don't just have original sin, but we have original sin life after life after life. So we're bringing, we're really starting out with like such a heavy load of being such a bad and horrible creature to have, oh, we've lived so many lives, we've incurred so much sin. So Christians, in
Yeah.
a way, they might have it light. They have an original sin. We have lifetimes of original sins that we're
Yeah.
carrying with us.
We're trying to out guilt the Catholics. Is that what we're doing? I know. No, I say that very playfully, by the way. But no, I hear you, and I think that again, is that a part of our tradition? Is that heaviness a part of our tradition? I think it is in some respects. Is it a defining aspect, or the summum bonum is the expression, I guess?
But our
Is
highest
it is
potential of the
where
tradition is the highest
yeah.
tradition.
So, again, I think going back to that kind of like we can lock into that kind of like literalist, ultra literalist, or cherry pick that aspect, and then it's just like, I'm not going to name any names, but there's one. I have a particular. I have a god brother who's actually a wonderful soul, and yet somehow, and I'm saying and yet, so I'm gonna like that's a terrible way of framing it, but anyway, forgive me. He has this thing. It's like you can like give him any verse, you could give him any story, and he'll find a way to bring it back to, lifetime after lifetime. We're so terrible, and there are other devotees that you can give them the heaviest, Bhagavatam verse or Chaitanya Charitamrita, verse or passage that's like really, and they'll come up with some beautiful, they'll take us to a place of hope, and they excite you to jump up and say, I'm so loved by Krishna, and there's aspects of truth. For myself, I would say that heaviness, my understanding, and especially maybe this is just me, now kind of coming into another stage of life. I think this happens as we age also, but you know, for me, heaviness to just sit with and feel, pardon my language, but just to feel shitty about myself, that's not bringing me closer to Krishna. That's not bringing me closer to anyone. For me to sit with that heaviness and then to turn and go, yeah, all of that is true. Maybe I've been bouncing around the material world for, anadi for, since time immemorial, I think is the old fashioned way of saying it or something, right? Like countless lifetimes, seemingly eternally, whatever, however you want to, slice and dice that one. Um, but the point is, Krishna is so kind. He's waiting for me. He's turning to me. He's sending, so many little and big gestures to me. He's calling to me. He's blowing kisses to me. However we want to frame it. And how amazing and how wonderful and how grateful I can be. Um, I have a terrible memory for this sort of thing, so I'm not going to give specific names, but there are some who have really deeply studied. But if you look at the catalog of poetry and of songs of bhajans in our tradition, um, penned by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, it's easy to take one or two of them in isolation, and look at them and walk away with a conclusion about what the mood of Krishna bhakti is. Um, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. They can all stand alone, and they give us, really amazing sort of insights. But something really amazing happens when you look at them as a body, and you look at the movement of, Sharanagati or Gitavali, right? When you look at the movement of prayers that he's composed, and you look at them in terms of, and I don't know if anyone's done sort of more academic work on this, but I think it would be a great project for anyone who's inspired to. If you look at them as a kind of a poetic, a musical, and a prayerful, kind
Progression.
of progression and trajectory, where a part of it is being deep in that place of lamentation, right? Um, uh, but that lamentation is not the end of the story. It's perhaps the penultimate. It's perhaps that which prepares us most richly. That people talk about hearts being broken and hearts being broken open. So I look at it as, yeah, sometimes it can sound even heartbreaking. It can sound kind of even off-putting if we're honest, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, it's so heavy. Does he have to be so heavy? Does he have to like be such a downer, right? Whatever. But no, it's actually breaking open our hearts to receive, and to be cognizant of, forget receiving, but even to be cognizant of the greatest hope that we that we could even imagine, or we could never imagine, that's beyond our even wildest expectations or imagination. It's preparing us for grace that is beyond what can even be placed into words. And so he offers some glimpses of it, but those things work in concert. And so I do think that the notion of, what I was originally kind of, or I was sort of trying to draw a contrast between this sort of notion of like, we are sinful, we are terrible, woe is us, and how I understand this quote of, truly I am the soul, and the nature of the soul is noble, is good, is so high. But I'd like to maybe take that back, and rather than, make it again, rather than get caught up in another binary of it's either this or that. No, it's both of those things. It's part of this journey, and how wondrous. And again, I think that takes us right back to the sort of the unlimited, potential. Wow. Okay, rein me in, because I don't know where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, like it is interesting you were sharing about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I was thinking, just like a couple hours ago, I was speaking with a friend, and she was telling me that maybe a few months ago now that it was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's appearance or disappearance day, and that day she listened to a class from someone, and it was just so like positive, uplifting, inspiring, and everything. And then after that, she listened to another class on the same topic about Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life and all of that. And that it was a bit like like a downer kind of a class, saying you
Yeah,
should do that, you shouldn't be like this, we are sinful and this and that and all of that. Like that made her like feel the opposite of the first class she heard. And she was saying how
yeah,
the topic was the same, but such a contrast. And like somebody else, like in the second class, like, ended up appreciating, saying like, wow, it was such an inspiring class. So it's interesting how it touches different people. But I do agree, like, all those things, sometimes it can feel a bit depressing too, like when you read that. But what I understand is that, the explanation that was given, at least what I heard was, oh, this is not about Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He's writing that for us. We are the wretched souls, and like, all of that. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is pure and all of that. But what I understand is that the vastness of God's love is like, it's so massive, it's so big that whatever we do, our possession seems like so little, like so small. So from that
yeah,
place, that's being spoken. And yeah, we many times it is misunderstood, and
yeah.
our conditioning and dysfunctional like behaviors come into play, and then we
Right.
kind of just, yeah, act as that is being humble.
Yeah, yeah. I will. Yeah, thank you. That's yeah. I've experienced that as well. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I mean, all of our acharyas, but I think for us, especially in the contemporary kind of context, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so talk about multidimensional, right? We have so much I think we can relate to, learn from, get challenged by. I also do want to, address this kind of point, which I've also heard that, oh, well, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur says this, he's saying it for us. He's not saying it for himself. Some of that is coming from a place of protection, right? Like when I love and want to honor my, especially in, and whether we're from an Indian background or not, I think all of us, something is lost in translation, even for those of us who are ethnically, right? It's just like the culture is so subtle. And so sometimes unless we're really strongly rooted in that culture, it's also like, it'd be hard to kind of, but it's so subtle where, especially in that culture, it's like, I want to show the utmost respect and the flow of love that manifests as respect for my seniors, that it's like I don't even want to entertain the notion of thinking of them as anything less than. So there's a little bit of a protectiveness, I think, where it's like, no, of course that can't apply to Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Like, oh, like it's like, like different Indic languages, they'll have like different things they'll say, or they'll make like clicking sounds. Like I know, like, when I was growing up, family elders, it would just be like, like don't even say it, right? And of course, I'm not Bengali, but like, Bangla speakers have like all sorts of funny things, and within that culture where they're like, like don't even think like anything negative, and that's true, and that's wonderful in its context, right? Emotionally, and also, would it be so terrible to consider that, yeah, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is writing for us? He's also writing for himself. Like, let's not strip our acharyas of their humanity. It's their humanity that Krishna especially uses and empowers to connect with all of us. And so I do, I think something is lost when we're so quick to be like, Bhaktivinoda Thakur cannot possibly. No, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is certainly doing something for us. And could it be possible that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was actually feeling all sorts of emotions that are, again, messy and that are really hard to understand? And, and his heart was paining, and he was actually, I'm so wretched. Um, I think that's also true. I think it's also very possible and very beautiful, and something that we should not be, troubled by or ashamed of, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had such a depth and capacity that he could feel that and simultaneously feel 100% protection, faith, acceptance and embrace of Krishna, right? My own Param Gurudev, Srila, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, I think it's true that that Srila Prabhupada was 100% protected by Krishna, and never felt for a moment that he was without the protection of Krishna and the protection of his Gurudev and the protection of Mahaprabhu, even in his most challenging days on the cold, icy streets of New York City, and at a time where he was practically from an external point of view, practically homeless. Like I think he even described himself as a vagabond or something like that. I think it's absolutely true that he was protected by Krishna, and he had, no fear, abhaya, charanaravinda. And I think also it's also true that simultaneously, in a very real human sense, that he went through difficulty and that he felt alone, and that he went and he checked the timings of the steamships going back, right? He had maybe real moments of human doubt and fear in that sense, right? How do you hold all those things, right? And maybe this is, now I'm doing my riffing thing. Swami Padmanabha doesn't get so much into it in this chapter, but I think that is also part and parcel of the multiplicity and the multivalence of unlimited potentiality. Unlimited potentiality will include those other emotions, those moments, those highs, those lows. He writes about it also in the sense of freedom, right? It has to include freedom to love God. It has to include freedom to turn away from God. It has to include all of that if it's really unlimited potentiality. And again, that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with, but it also that's real freedom. And that makes meaning of agency and autonomy and authenticity, right? All of that. Am I really an authentic person if ontologically there's a gun to my head, or if I'm so fixed and changeless as the soul that it's a done deal? Am I really authentic? Am I really an agent? Am I really pleasing Krishna to the fullest extent? In our tradition, I think Swami Padmanabha lays out a really good case, that our tradition would say no, that freedom has to be there, and therefore that potentiality, that ever evolving, dynamic essence of the Atma has to be there.
Yeah.
Just going back to the Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada examples. Another example, I don't remember the particularities of like where it was, but there was apparently, I'll give my sort of what I remember of it. The story goes that I think even on the Vyasasana, but Srila Prabhupada, largely to an audience of largely his own disciples, made some statement to the effect of that I will never fall down. And very, very strong statement that I will never fall down from my vows, from sannyas, etc. And then I think the way I remember hearing the story is like probably in the very next instance, after that class or that lecture, that darshan, whatever it was, Srila Prabhupada went in front of the deities and was standing in front of the deities praying for a long, long time. And one of his disciples, who perhaps was playing the role of an assistant or a secretary or something like this, but who was close enough that he could sort of see Srila Prabhupada deep in prayer, he kind of, with some hesitation, as I understand it, but he sort of dared to ask. He said, Srila Prabhupada, what were you praying for? And the way I remember the story, Srila Prabhupada responds that I was praying that may I not fall down, may I be protected from falling down, right? So it's this idea that on the one hand, both of those things are true, that Srila Prabhupada could make such a bold, some might even say audacious kind of statement of like I am firmly protected by Krishna, I will not fall down, and have that conviction, and at the same time be constantly praying at every moment, may I be protected, I'm helpless, I'm dependent on you. And so that to me also, I was reminded of that also with this, when Swami Padmanabha writes so beautifully about it's vital that we have the freedom to choose to turn to God, not just once. Also, I think that's another thing that's important that I appreciate about this chapter and about this book. That again, let's really try to guard against this one and done mentality. Sometimes we talk about the freedom to turn to God, right? And yes, I've turned away from you, Krishna, and now I'm going to turn towards you. Turn towards you. I'm done. It's a constant turning. It's a constant turning, and that constant turning requires constant freedom, and that constant freedom requires some kind of intrinsic, dynamic potentiality.
Yeah.
There always have to be options for me to constantly be able to deepen my relationship by turning to Krishna, turning back to Krishna, turning a
What you
little bit
just
more towards Krishna.
what you just said highlights the paradox, because you said constantly so it's we're constantly evolving, we're constantly free, we're constantly choosing,
Yeah,
making new choices. So there's the consistency and the evolving, the changeless
yeah,
and the evolving nature. Before we wrap up for today, what does it? There are so many things that were touched on in this section. One quick thing, it's even kind of known in larger circles that potentiality, that often we're more afraid of our potential and what we can do
Yeah.
than held back by thinking that we can't do it. So do you think that also comes into play?
Oh gosh, yeah. I have to admit, I think, sometimes someone says something and you get like it like hits a little too close to home. That hits very close to home for me because I think that if I'm being honest and if I can, you know, um, open up a little bit, that is something that I think I've always struggled with personally, as long as I can remember. Um, and that especially in the last couple of years, with assistance and guidance from others, both in terms of spiritual counsel, but also in a secular sense, is something that I've been really trying to become more aware of in my own life. And so that resonates so much with me. Um, I think it manifests for us in different ways, I don't know how, but hopefully we'll bring this back to bhakti. But that's where the leap of faith comes in. But if you'll indulge me for a second, I just want to talk about one way that it shows up for me that maybe at first glance kind of seems a little bit more, um, quote unquote mundane, right? Or in the secular sphere. Um, I I feel like I've been thinking about and reflecting on a lot of my own relationship with things like achievement, accomplishments, excellence, even. And without going into too much detail or getting a free therapy session out of you, I'll say that one of the things I've been reflecting on is even from my childhood, I was raised in a kind of in a household that was really valued academic achievement. And I mean, I have like even they sounds almost cliche if you know anything about sort of, like South Asian, South Asian families, especially in the West, it's like the kind of the typical like, um, the kind of driven tiger parent type of cliches or stereotypes. But I really kind of lived that a lot. And I think especially from my father, getting a lot of sort of pressure to be like, if you're not the head of the class, you don't count. I remember one instance even where, bringing home like a 98%, out of 100 on a test. And of course, my father's question was,
What happened to the other 2%?
what happened to the other two? And so then I quickly internalized, right? I don't know how old I was, but I just internalized, okay, like, gotta, so then I brought home, I was able to bring home like 100, 100 out of 100, whatever, perfect score. And then my dad's question was, do you want to guess? Any guesses?
Why aren't you pushing yourself harder? You maybe need to take harder classes.
That's an interesting one. Something similar, but his question
Did,
was,
did others get 100?
see, because she's from a South Asian background, that's why.
I have similar experiences, like where I haven't gotten 100 or like top of the class. And
Yeah.
this happened when I was like, yeah, very, very little. And then after that, I just always wanted to be the top.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
relate
mean,
very much.
so that was it, right. So you internalize you have to be, the top and like, all these kinds of things about, like all or nothing. So one way that it got internalized for me was all or nothing, right? Um, even if even a 98 is not good enough, what to speak of, hitting the average, right? Average was like a dirty word in my household. But then the other thing that got internalized was now, and it's so insidious, right? But now it's not only good enough to be on the top, but somehow you have to be in a solitary category. You can't share, right? Success is not shared. Success, achievement, accomplishment, for it to matter, it has to be exclusive or exclusionary. And then also even more sort of grossly, um, my success may actually be dependent on someone else's failure, right? And so like there's an inherent sort of competitiveness. So all these things, right? And I can think of, so many other examples now, right? Like 40 years later, I'm sitting and, realizing, wow, this stuff runs deep. And I carry this into all aspects of my life. And I have this all or nothing mentality. And I'm very conscious of, how I show up and how others show up. And so I'm inherently competitive in a way that, for instance, my wife is not, because she had a very different upbringing. And so for her notion of achievement is very different than mine and is not tied into this sort of zero-sum games.
Well,
So
thank God.
parenting our daughter can be really a struggle in that way, because we're both bringing very different paradigms of what success means and but all these things are like ghosts, right? Like my father's voice, my father is still living, but certainly, at least superficially, doesn't have the same hold over me, right? I don't, still owe him, my accomplishments, my achievements, but now I've just internalized his voice. So there's a lot of voices in there, and not to sound too in need of, mental health interventions, but right, I'm carrying around all these voices, all these influences, all these, kind of subtle things. And I've internalized this idea of all or nothing, of accomplishment, achievement looks like this, and it doesn't look like that, and competition and all of this. And so to go back to your question, right? There's something really scary to me now about my own potential. There's something really attractive and compelling about it. So there's a drive, I think, that's there, at least for me, and it's going to manifest differently, because I think for Shweta Dweep, Radhika, it's going to maybe look a little different. Maybe I'm making this up, but maybe you lean more into the drive side and you're super ambitious and driven. For me, I have a little bit of that drive side, but another way it manifests for me is at a certain point, I fear, oh, I may not actually be the best at this. So you know what I do?
Don't
I
play.
say, I'm not. I'm going to take my toys and go home. I'm not playing, or I make an excuse. Right. So it's it's so much of that stuff. It's so much of that stuff. And another way, a big way that it shows up for me is in self-defeating behavior, particularly around procrastination. So I procrastinate. I procrastinate quite a bit, and I don't procrastinate. We have lots of different reasons. Procrastination is very common, but I've learned a lot from a particular theory, actually, from a colleague here at the university, um, who's done a lot of work on the relationship between procrastination and self-worth, and that really resonates with me. And I think it goes back to your really excellent insight and question, where for me, part of my procrastination is I it's really scary to allow myself to embrace my full potential, or my full potentiality, right? Even in terms of a specific accomplishment. So I have to write a book chapter. I've been given plenty of notice, right? It's a very, very, very real example. So if somehow or other a publisher is listening to this who I've, you know, pissed off, and they'll understand where I'm coming from. But I've been given an assignment to write a book chapter. I have I had plenty of time, whatever, but it's really intimidating. The blank page is intimidating to me. The thought that, what if, and this is all very subtle, but what if I put my all in all, and still somehow that chapter is kind of, mid, as the kids say these
Mediocre.
days. Yeah, mediocre, average, right? Mid, meh. Oh, what a scary thought. So it's easier for me. It's easier for me, and I'm telling you quite honestly, I know I'm being cheeky about it, but this is 100% true for me. It's easier for me to procrastinate. And now this thing that I had literally in some cases, 6 months to, notice, to work on, to workshop, to really develop some beautiful offering. And a lot of times this is like in the realm of even, right, because my work intersects with my spiritual life. So this is, it's not even about subject matter that I'm not inspired by. This is, in some cases, it's especially when I'm inspired by the subject matter. But what do? I wait, I give myself, suddenly it's a week or 4 days or 3 days or whatever. And oh no. And what do? And maybe I get an extension, and then I do it again. And finally it comes to a point where I have to drill down and I write something and I submit it, and it's pretty darn good, if I can say so myself. But I give myself the window because I say, this is pretty good for for working on this thing for 3 days. So I write. Does that make
Have a,
sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense,
have a
but
built-in, you have a built-in excuse if it's not up to the par.
exactly. I've given myself the escape hatch of, right. Hey, who can fault me? I can't even fault myself for 3 days worth of work. Like, I stand by this, and and I do, and I appreciate, especially when it comes to writing. It's something that I kind of do pride myself on. I enjoy writing, but I give myself that out to have to face the really truly terrifying question. And I know we're sort of wrapping up, but I do think, and I do see, and I was hoping I'd get there, and I do see parallels with how I approach my spiritual life and steps in my spiritual life, and maybe this resonates with other folks, and maybe it manifests differently for you. And I don't want to generalize too much, but I do think potentiality has um, that side to it where it can be really scary. And so it's easier to chant bad rounds or not chant the rounds at all, or it's easier to, make myself very busy with a lot of external stuff. And right now, however it shows up, but it's easy for me to do that and then to give myself an escape hatch if I need it. Rather than to maybe like face what my spiritual life would look like if I really took a deep breath and embraced this like unlimited potentiality that's there, that's always been there.
Well, first of all, I so appreciate your utter vulnerability in sharing and the insights that
Yeah.
you've with yourself. Um, and yeah, it's so, I think we need to normalize imperfection, especially considering the fact that perfection has no fixed maximum. We will never, perfection will never be reached. There will always be a new perfection. Today's perfection is tomorrow's imperfection. So that could be very, very scary for someone who thinks that attaining perfection is something that's possible. Because, like you said, that must be very freezing of one's movement. If the goal is to reach perfection, and you know that perfection is not attainable, then wow, that must
Yeah,
be very, very stifling. So I think we
yeah,
need to normalize imperfection and put perfection in its place at the feet of imperfection.
I agree. And I also, I mean, again, in maybe the spirit of this chapter, and maybe this is to be unpacked by folks, on their own, or at a later time, because I know we are coming at our time together. But I'm just struck right now by even maybe interrogating the kind of binary of imperfection and perfection. And we didn't get too much time to talk about it, but one of the things I really like about where this section takes us is, to me, it was like a little unexpected. I didn't know that Swami Padmanabha was going to go here, but talking about sort of the spiritual world as this realm of divine madness, where it's like reliving sort of the same thing over and over again, but it's not the same thing because it unfolds differently each time and richer and deeper. And it's like I jotted down. I write in the margins of my books, so I jotted down. A quote, "It doesn't get any better than this," and then I put dot dot dot, and then it does, question mark, right? So this idea that like the eternal residence, and us included, right? um Engaging eternally, being in Vaikuntha or in Vraj, in Golok, and where we're waking up every day and we're experiencing perfection upon perfection upon perfection, if we want to use that language. And then it unfolds in a different way and is more perfect. And so if tomorrow, okay, I'm going to sound a little like a philosophy student dropout right now, or an Instagram influencer. Let's see how this comes out. Okay, if today is perfect, and then tomorrow is more perfect, does that mean that what I thought was today's perfection was actually imperfection, right? In other words, if there's this ever-increasing perfection, then if we're stuck in a perfection-imperfection binary, stay with me here. I don't know where I'm going. Okay, stay with me here. If we're stuck in a perfection-imperfection binary, right, then in this system of ever-increasing perfection, then we, in a sense, we would have to say that every yesterday is imperfect. Every today is perfect. But if every tomorrow is more perfect, right? So again, we're back to that. So I think let's just break the binary of perfect and imperfect. And I love this sort of, if we have to use a lot language of perfection, then perfect, more perfect, most perfect, ever increasing perfect, perfecter. I don't know. Like maybe language finds its limits, but that experience that is beyond our stifling language, it goes on and will continue to, what Maharaj called the profound holy madness of divine love. Isn't that hope giving? That's what awaits us, or that's what's open to us right now.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think we will use this as a jumping off point and invite people to take a pause with this and to digest and to internalize many of the really insightful and important points that you brought to the table, Venkata Bhatta. I really appreciate this the depth of your offering here, and really
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
thank you so much. Thank you, Sweta Dweep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Radhe Radhe.
Take a moment of serene contemplation to immerse yourself in the changeless nature of the soul. Reflect on how this inherent stability harmonizes with the soul's ever-evolving potential, a quality that is itself unchanging. Finally, meditate on the profound significance of existing as a living paradox, simultaneously changeless and ever-expanding. Contemplate how life's intricate complexities can find perfect integration within this dynamic balance at the core of your being.